On a sultry evening in Dallas, Texas not long ago, an overflow crowd gathered in this auditorium to gain knowledge about codependency. They came to hear family systems lecturer and therapist Terry Kellogg. This is what they heard.
I would like to introduce to you my friend Terry Kellogg. Terry?
First thing I think I'll do is auction this chair off. Do I have any bidders? Really, we can pass it over there. It's really nice to be here in the Sun Belt. Actually, it was raining when I flew in tonight. It was raining when I flew out of here last Thursday. In fact, I think our plane floated to Austin and we took off from there. The last time, I've been flying a lot lately, and the last trip I took to Texas, I was going from Minneapolis to Austin. They took me to Memphis. And then I got to Memphis. They said, we're not going to Austin today. And I really wanted to go to Memphis and stay. So I think I ended up in Dallas later on that day. But I finally looked at my ticket and realized I was flying Adult Child Airways. We're not going anywhere today. So I figured that next time I fly, I'm going Codependecy Airways. They take you to your door, pick up your laundry, you know. Lately, I've been feeling a little bit like a slinky on an escalator, though. My family took down the porch light and they put up a searchlight. It's really good to be here. I'm a little overwhelmed. One of my fears about giving a lecture is that lots of people will come. So here you are, and here I am. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I don't recognize any familiar bodies, but the faces are familiar. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about my family, and some of you know a little bit about my family already. I'm going to keep the important stuff secret, though. Like my brother that has reverse paranoia. He thinks he's following someone. I know it because I've been following him. All my life I've been following him, actually. And my obsessive-compulsive sister I worry about all the time. Anyway, I was raised in a violent, alcoholic family on my parents' side. And also Catholic on my parents' side. And we had guilt and all you could eat. And arguing and fighting and you know, drinking and rage and jealousy. And then my parents got home and things got bad. I think that I was in denial for most of my life, not about the violence. I knew there was violence. I wasn't even really in denial about the alcoholism. I knew that was there too. I was in denial about the fact that it had impacted my life for most of my life. And when I became aware of it, that it was really affecting my life, I came aware through some subtle signs that were going on. My marriage was falling apart. My career was falling apart. I was falling apart. I couldn't take care of myself. I was depressed, and I couldn't do very much parenting. Then I thought there might be a problem. And I think that I still didn't quite relate it to the family very much, but I knew that there was a problem, and I got into therapy. But I wanted to be an alcoholic. You know, because I knew about alcoholism. I knew that, you know, if you're an alcoholic, you went to Arizona for 5 or 6 weeks and you got it straightened out. You know, but I couldn't do that. No one would let me go. And they didn't have treatment for codependency. They didn't have codependency then. You know, codependency was invented fairly recently up in Minnesota. And it was all a mistake. You know, it was supposed to be cold dependency, but they left out the L in some of the literature and it became codependency. But we didn't know what codependency was, so I sort of did my work the hard way and didn't know what to call it and didn't really know what it was about. So I'm going to try and share a little bit about some of the things that I've learned about families and about changing. And I think that, you know, one of the first things I did when I started becoming aware of the impact of the family was I started a short-term treatment program, and that was about 1980, 1982, and I called it Treatment for All the Other Stuff. You know, or for those people who have all the other stuff, which I did. Compulsivity, codependency, you know, problems with feelings, just depression, that, you know, that some of us that don't have that identifiable addiction of chemical dependency. And eventually we called it the Compulsivity Clinic, and we now call it the New Life Family Workshop. But in doing that, what I really wanted people to do going through our programs was to start looking at how they got set up to be where they are. You know, this dysfunction that we're, you know, acting out ourselves is usually a learned dysfunction, and it's usually learned in family and childhood. Codependency is called a lot of things. You know, it was first spotted in alcoholic families, and I think we spotted it there because it was the only time we got families together long enough to spot much of anything. And we noticed that the spouses usually were about as sick as the alcoholic. Sometimes they looked worse. And they didn't take care of themselves, and they had minimization, projection, denial, all those terms you hear with chemical dependency. Spouses had it too, but a lot of them didn't use chemicals. So we started calling them the co-alcoholic or the codependent eventually. Now, we thought that you got codependent married to a chemically dependent person. Now we know, though, that you marry a chemically dependent person because you are codependent. And that it really is more about family and childhood than it is about family and marriage and relationships and adulthood. I think that a codependent is a person who has learned to react more to what's outside of themselves than to what's inside of self. You know, we just do more spectating, we take care of other people more, we notice their feelings, we get involved, we feel over-responsible, we burn out, and we fry ourselves, you know, trying to do for others what we won't do for ourselves. Now, that reactiveness, though, is a developmental issue because we lost our own identity and the right to notice and take care of ourselves. And we lose that in childhood. And I think that looking at our family of origins is the first step in any recovery process. You know, I think that if we're really going to change it, we have to make it real where it began. And then we have to look at the roles that we played. And tonight I'm going to talk some about roles, family roles. And that's going to be a specific topic of tonight. Eventually, we're hoping to do a series on codependency focusing on each aspect, and roles are just one aspect of codependency. But see, what I've found in working with codependents and in my own life is I didn't know myself, but I always knew my role. I always knew the function or the part that I was supposed to play in a setting. You know, and sometimes I didn't belong in a setting, and so I got left out of the setting, and that was a role too. And so I'm going to talk about roles, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about my family roles, and then we'll talk about roles in general. But before I do, I'm going to give you my lecture on alcoholism, okay? Now, I've been giving this lecture for a long time, and it's about an hour and 45-minute lecture, and so that doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else. But I've been also shortening my lecture on alcoholism for a long time, and I've got it down to approximately 11 seconds. Now, and I'm proud of that. However, I was recently asked to give a lecture on alcoholism at Gillette Corporation, Minnesota, and I forgot the other hour 44 minutes. So I had to go over my own. Anyway, I'm going to give you my short lecture on alcohol. This is alcohol, and this is a person, and alcoholism is that more and more of this person's life revolves around the use of alcohol. I always pause and wait for a standing ovation on that one. You know, it's really my best lecture. It's the clearest, and it's going to be for sale on tape for 9 cents after the. Okay. Now, you know, alcoholism is a disease, and it has the earmarks of a disease. You know, it's primary, progressive, pervasive, and it's permanent, and it's terminal. It has a definable onset, predictable outcomes, identifiable symptoms, and so it's a disease. Okay, but there's one thing that you don't read about when you read about the disease of alcoholism, and that is that alcoholics rather, don't very often like to live alone. You know, that's sort of a basic fact. I know it's sort of too obvious, right? Of course, most of us don't very often like to live alone, although if you lived alone, this should be very much fun for you at this lecture right now. In fact, if you didn't get much intimacy as children, here's your chance to make up for it. They're usually a relation. In fact, we don't very often intervene that much with alcoholics. What we intervene with is the enabling system, because when the enabling of the support system or the codependent system changes, the alcoholic can't really support their disease for much longer, and they have to change. That's the intervention process as we see it now. Okay, so there's usually someone in a relationship, and usually it's someone of the opposite sex. Now, what usually happens when you get, I'll give you my 11-second lecture on codependency, okay? You want that one? You know it already, don't you? This person's life revolves around this person's life. Sort of like the addict is addicted to alcohol, the codependent is addicted to the addict. See, what kind of day the alcoholic has depends on the relationship with alcohol. What kind of day the codependent has depends on the relationship with the alcoholic and how that person is doing, and if they're angry or if they're upset or if they're drinking or if they're home or whatever's happened the last week with them, and so on. All right, now when two people like this live together, what usually happens? They have kids. Who said that? You know what? I give this lecture in junior high and high school, and the answer comes right like that every time. When I talk to adults, they kind of sit there. You know how soon we forget, you know? So, of course, it would come. Okay, thanks. All right, great. Okay. So now we have kids in the system, all right? Some of these, and so on down the line. Now, a family is a system with needs. And people in that system also have a need for a place in the system. Okay, what kind of needs do you think a family has? What does a family need? Needs shelter, food, money. Pardon? Money, love, clothing, respect, husbanding, roles, spousing, parenting, fun, leadership. Okay, intimacy, pride, cars, Corvettes, 911S Targa in the yard. Okay, so these are the basic needs of the system, right? Now, would you say, in looking at that list of needs, that these two people are going to do a real great job of fulfilling them? Not exactly. So where are those needs going to come from? Who's going to meet those needs? The kids. Kids. And so what you get in a dysfunctional family is that the kids start to meet the needs of the system that are about the adults, and you get this role reversal. Kids are losing their childhood and becoming like adults in the system, and they're starting to take care of things that are not about childhood. This is the beginning of the loss of self with codependency. You see, if the family needs, even parenting, guess who becomes the parent? This one. This is my sister. My sister had her first child at 3 years old. And she was already changing diapers when she was 4. Now that's fairly early to have a child, but it's possible. Interestingly enough, my sister, who raised us, in fact, she did all the disciplining. At least she chased us around the living room with a shoe regularly. And made up the rules as she was going along. She was mean enough that she had a calling. She went into the convent. I always thought that was a prerequisite to going into the convent. Now, I survived Catholic education. I know this stuff. Although I found some things happen. I travel enough now to know where all the women that were mean that didn't go into the convent go now. They become stewardesses, flight attendants. No kidding. I meet nuns now, and they're nice as heck. And I get on these airplanes, and these people go up with this ruler and say, "You didn't put your seat tray down," but anyway, okay. So then my sister left the convent, and she started teaching kindergarten, and she teaches in a living room setting with sofas. And so for her whole entire life, she has been raising someone else's kids in someone else's living room. And that's been her role, and she got stuck there. And I think that what else does a family need? Love. You ever notice in a lot of families you get this kid who, he just kind of cares about everybody and everything, plays kissy face with anybody that walks through the door, and adopts everything that lives, moves, and breathes in the neighborhood. And a veterinarian's assistant, candy striper in the hospital. Going to go over and save India later on, when they're not too busy. That's a loving, caring, responsible child, right? And so now we've got care. We've got someone that provides love and nurturing. And also productivity. My sister, when she was 9 years old, in fact, got a job at a root beer stand. And she saved all her money, and at 13 she bought the family sofa that made into a bed. Now that's unusual behavior for a 9-year-old, right? And so she became one of the providers in the family because she had all these insecurities about money and my dad not working or spending all his money, and the parents fighting about money. So of course she picked that up. We all absorbed it, and we all have money issues. It's one of the major issues of children of alcoholics. Money insecurities. In fact, I recently finally had to take a look at the fact that I would rather buy 3 pair of pants on sale that don't fit than 1 pair for the same price it does. See, now I've got 3 pair, but I can't wear them. No. Okay. I think I was on my sister still. Oh, move to my brother. Okay, my brother had a lot of rage, and he was a rebel, and I was asking you, how many of you rebelled? How many of you decided that you would be different than your parents? Now, I think all rebels basically become self-destructive, or the rebellion itself is self-destructive because 180 degrees from sick is still sick. And that when we decide to not be like someone, we very often become exactly like them. But sometimes we're the opposite, but still controlled by what they're like. I'll give you an example of that. I think I decided to rebel against my dad's violence by becoming nonviolent. Okay? And I didn't see myself as a violent person at all. Of course, I played rugby for 14 years, but... but what I had done was I had made the violence subterranean. I had just brought it down to a different level with my children. And in fact, there's a book that I like. It's called The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. Well, he talks about, he was on a picnic and his dad started beating up his brother. And that kind of spoils the family picnics a lot, But, and he said that I was also on a picnic and I noticed that the same thing happened, but I didn't beat anybody up. I just made a shaming statement. and everybody felt rotten. See, and that was what I did with my violence. I made it that subterranean thing. With a look or a word, I could turn that warm summer afternoon into a cold winter night. And that's violence too. And it's 180 degrees from my dad's, but it's still sick and still had the same impact. My brother was the object of a lot of the shame in my family, and he felt shame about himself, but he also had a lot of rage. And he used his rage well. Actually, he became a hero in the family because of his rage. He moved from being the scapegoat to the hero for a couple of years, and he did that by wrestling and playing football. Where else can you get applauded for your rage? And so he became the family hero now. He also was an extension of my dad. One of the things that happens in the dysfunctional family is that parents don't feel very good about themselves. That's the beginning of the dysfunction. They don't have their own identity, and they have that loss of self and that depression, that dislike of self, and the addictive roles that they get into. And so I think that what my dad wanted to do was to have some way of feeling better about himself, so he had kids. And we were supposed to make him feel better about himself. How would we do that? By becoming what he wasn't. So we all became extensions of him, my 3 sons. And I was supposed to be an extension of his athletics and play sports, and then he could brag about what a good athlete he would be and what he was and how great he was because he had a son who was playing sports. My brother became an extension of his career, and he was supposed to go out and make lots of money and not throw it all away like my father did. And my younger brother was an extension of my dad's wildness and fun and partying and craziness. And so he had 3 kids, and we all got enmeshed, and we became extensions of my dad. And my brother, I think, well, when he was 17 years old, my dad bought him a car just like his car, filled it with sewing machines, sent him to Montana to sell the sewing machines just like my dad was doing. So, you know, there's a pretty clear message about you go out and do, for me, what I don't want to go out and do anymore. But I want you to be me instead of you. And so, incidentally, I went with him as a driver. I was 15, I could drive. The first call we had, we went out, the guy we were supposed to talk to was out in this field, so we drove out in the field. The car is still there. It's a monument to family roles and dysfunction. Got hung up on a rock out in the field. I think that my brother also became extremely bonded to my mom through the abuse. You know, it's an interesting thing. I do a lot of talking about bonding and enmeshment in families. I think it's one of the most destructive things that happens in families is to have favorite kids, where you bond with them, because almost always the kids that we're bonding with that are our favorite kids are there to take care of our needs, and we're not there to take care of their needs anymore. And that destroys their chance of having real relationships with other people. And they usually have a mythology about their relationship with us. They keep us on a pedestal, and then they go out and they get in relationships, but they always have this defended self because in their childhood they were used. I think that bonded and meshed role is a very abusive one. That's one I was in with my mother. In fact, when I talk about my roles, I talk about how at 9 years old, I was married to my mom, and she was also my first client. I used to take care of her, I used to talk to her, I'd give her marriage counseling, I'd clean the cupboards when she was gone, I'd joke with her, and I always talk about how I saw that as emotional incest. Now my mom saw that as career development though, so there's a difference of perspective here. My brother got bonded too, and he also got bonded to my mother, interestingly enough, but he didn't get bonded from her being nice to him or from him being nice to her. He got bonded by the abuse. See, and sometimes the abused kid gets more bonded to the parents than the non-abused. I call it, well, it's the same thing that happens to battered women. It's why battered women, when they're in relationships, don't leave the relationship, because they really lose their choices about leaving. They lose their power. They lose their sense of self. They lose their rights. And so they can't leave. It doesn't even occur to them to leave. And that was what happened with my brother with my mother. In fact, he used to go to bed saying, I hate mother, but he spent his whole life trying to win, buy, beg, steal, borrow her attention, love, approval, or affection. See, and so that bonding of abuse, I think, has controlled his whole life. And he's extremely dependent on relationships. He doesn't feel like he's whole outside of a relationship. That's codependency again. So the abused, the scapegoat, also becomes codependent. When I was born, I was actually very cute. Why is it there's always a large group that laughs? Yes, I know. I had a lot more hair then, actually. I saw my baby pictures. I was about 2 or 3 years old, and I had this long, blonde, curly, golden hair. You know, it was like I was Shirley Temple in gold. And that was why she cut it, because someone said they thought I looked like a girl. She cut it. I've never forgiven her for that. It never grew back is the problem. Someday I'm going to have one hair that's going to fall out, and then I'll go around and say I lost my hair today. Anyway. Think about that one. Slinky on an escalator? Who is this guy? Anyway, okay, so So I was cute for a while. I had my run, and about 9 years, or no, I was 7 years old, my younger brother was born, and he was cuter, and the whole family fussed over him. And see, that was another need of the family, for fun. But you know, they took him over me, and I didn't think he was cute at all. He looked like Winston Churchill. So I got lost, and I did become a lost child. 7 years old, I didn't have a place. I sat on a neighbor's step and said, I don't know, what do you want to do? He said, I don't know, what do you want to do? And I'd say, I don't know, what do you want to do? We said that for 2 years. And that was all we did. We didn't have a place. And then at 9, I discovered that my mother needed a husband. Actually, I was drafted for the job. I also discovered that I could do well at sports and get my name in the paper. I also became a family hero, became an extension of my dad, and became bonded to my mom. By the time I was 12, I was my dad's dad. I was parenting him. You know, if we go fishing, which we didn't very often, but when we did, I had to teach him how to do the lines, tie the bait, you know, the hooks, do the bait, you know, and where to fish. It was like he was helpless in that kind of a setting. In fact, when I was looking through our old pictures and I saw that picture of me with the Shirley Temple hair, I also saw a picture of my dad with his hunting buddies. There were 2 guys, and they were all dressed up, and they all had pheasants that he was with, and he had a white shirt and tie on. Which, and I looked and I said, Dad, is that the day you went hunting? Well, anyway. And so I continue in these roles, you know, and I'm losing myself. I'm not me anymore. I don't know who I am. You know, and the key about the roles is that, yes, I was a clown, and then I sort of got through that role, and I was lost, and I got through that role. And I was bonded to my mother, and I worked very hard, very late in life, starting to get through that role, because it was very difficult for me to get a divorce from my mom. See, when I go to therapy, you know, therapists might mention my mom, and I'd say, yeah, she was one of those enabler persons, but she was really, we were close, and we talked, and she did her best. But let's get back to Dad. I really want to talk about my mean, alcoholic, violent father. And I keep doing that. And, you know, no therapist ever really helped me, in all that time I was going, deal with my mom, because I was in so much denial, and I was protecting her. And the reality is, yes, my rage was about my dad, but my intimacy blocks were about my mom. I couldn't get close to Gretchen. I couldn't have a relationship because of my relationship with my mom. I was already married. It would have been bigamy to be married to Gretchen. And I was already angry at my mom, but I was protecting her, and so the anger spilled out at Gretchen. And so I was losing my ability to have relationship, and in therapy it wasn't doing me a lot of good to yell at my dad, to talk about and debrief the violence. It wasn't that I couldn't have an intimate relationship until I realized that I actually had to get at least an emotional divorce from my mom and see how angry I was that I had been used, because all that time I thought that she was there for me. I was the one that had to be there for her. That was the role reversal in the setting. I also learned how to be an addict, and I learned how to be a pretty good addict, except drugs and alcohol didn't work, so I couldn't go to treatment. My brother learned how to be an addict, too. He did better than I did, actually. I recently intervened on him. I said, Jim, you're an amazing person. You could walk into any 12-step program in the United States and feel right at home. You know, the old anything worth doing is worth doing fanatically addiction. My younger brother, I think my younger brother became an extension of my dad. He became bonded to my dad by being Dad's best buddy. And when I left the family, he also got bonded to my mom. And for a long time he was lost, and for some of the time he was a rebel, but most of the time he was just the wild and the crazy one in the family. And people that noticed our family, they were always charmed by him, but they always said, he's sure crazy. My youngest brother committed suicide. My youngest brother was also the family sacrifice. He OD'd at 23 years old on drugs and alcohol. And it was interesting because I know that at the time that he started to use drugs, he was rebelling against my dad's chemical dependency. Remember I said 180 degrees from sick is still sick, and it's on the same line. And so in some ways, my dad, instead of using that and seeing that about the family and about our family needing to get help, he used it as an excuse to drink for another 10 years. And I think that's the secondary tragedy of my brother's suicide, is that my dad had another reason to drink. Although that wasn't why he drank, it was just an excuse at the time why he drank. I think that most of us have found roles in our life growing up. Sometimes we've adapted. Sometimes we were scripted and told what we were like. You know, sometimes we got enmeshed with who someone else is. I couldn't sometimes differentiate between myself and my mom, or myself and my dad. Sometimes it seemed like I was depressed when I wasn't having anything depressing going on around in my life. Sometimes it seemed like I had all this shame when I hadn't been doing shameful stuff. I got enmeshed in their reality. The enmeshment roles are also very powerful in families. You know, we just kind of lose ourselves and we feel like other people in our family. In fact, I think that you get more enmeshed in what's denied in families than in any other part of what happens in families. See, in a family, it's a system And there are no secrets in the system. There's only denial. And all the stuff that gets acted out, all the stuff that is being acted out, all the stuff that's being repressed or hidden or denied, the kids pick it up. And they'll go out and do it. If it's workaholism, and the workaholism is a pathology, you'll find kids that will go out and they'll act out and get in trouble to show that the family is pathological. If it's rage, you'll find a child that will tear up his room. If it's depression, you'll find a child that will be committing suicide or feeling suicidal. Actually, I've worked with a lot of families, and most of the families I've worked with where there was an adolescent suicide or suicide attempt, mom or dad or both had a death wish that they weren't dealing with. What I think is that kids are acting out not their own suicidality, but their parents' suicidality. I think kids are acting out not their own rage, but their parents' repressed rage. A family is a system. Nothing gets lost in the system. We only deny it. And the problem is, what's denied we can't choose. See, nothing changes till we make it real. And if it's denied, we can't make it real, so we continue to act it out. We communicate it. See, 80% of all communications in a family is nonverbal. We show our children how to behave. We show them what to do in more ways than with our words. And so if let's say that my dad, let's say that I go downtown Minneapolis and I expose myself to the noontime crowd. I have an affair in the afternoon. I shoplift my way through a large shopping mall, and I feel suicidal like driving in a truck on the way home. When I walk in the door, what do I say to my family? I say, boy, have I had a busy day. You know, but what do I say really? I say, I've been working and phone calls and it's driving me nuts, and so my family thinks I'm just working all the time. Now, a few years later, I've got a child who's having an affair, and I've got another one who's exposing himself. I've got another one who's shoplifting, and I've got another one who's feeling suicidal. And they all go to therapists, and the therapist says, well, what was your family like? Oh, my family, well, my dad worked a lot, but otherwise they were all right. And that's what they say. But what's the reality? What is their acting out really? They're acting out the secrets. See, and I don't think we can choose about acting out secrets. You know, I said my brother stole. The reality is that everybody in my family stole. Every one of us. My sister stole. She was a nun in the convent. She got busted for shoplifting at Disneyland. She was. You know, I know the first time I said this was about 4 years ago. She gave me permission. Someone in the back room said, it's okay if you don't get in the habit. I stole. My younger brother once stole an 8-foot slate-top pool table out of an open bowling alley. Alone. And he had rickets 3 years before that. He cured his rickets by lifting weights and eating vegetable soup. And he sold it, and he got caught 10 miles away with it laid over the back of my dad's convertible, and the policeman asked him what was going on. He says, I always take my pool table for a ride at night. Anyway, 4 of us were stealing, see, but the one thing that none of us knew was the whole time we were growing up, my dad was stealing too. See, he was stealing while we were growing up. We didn't know it, though. It was denied. But every one of us acted out, whether it was about us or not. See, and this is true with you know, and how do we know that? Well, we know it because of we get enmeshed and we realize we act out the feelings, the rage at the world, the paranoia that they're going to get them. You got to get them before they get you. You know, you notice things out of the corner of your eye. You know, my dad would smoke a cigar in a drugstore and put it out and not pay for it. You know, you live with the feelings. You notice things. You live with the premises and the rules. Rules about property. Rules about boundaries. In fact, basically, stealing is a boundary issue. You know, that you can't respect and don't feel okay about your own boundaries, and you can't respect other people's boundaries. You know, and you learn the rules about stuff, you learn premises about life, the world's a shitty place, why not rip it off, and you act those out. You get into roles that are acting out, but see, they're enmeshed roles. They're enmeshed in what's going on in the family that we don't talk about. The problems aren't the problems in our families. Alcoholism isn't the problem. I didn't even care if my dad drank. The violence bothered me a bit. The emotional unavailability was the pits. It wasn't the drinking that bothered me, though. It was all the other stuff. But most of what bothered me was the denial. I couldn't make choices because I didn't know what was going on. If anybody came up to any one of us and said, family, this person is stealing, and the rest of you have the right to make that your value or not, we could have made it a choice. But you see, nothing changes till it becomes real. As long as it stays covert, we can't change it. I've discovered that a lot of therapy is very simple. It's making the covert explicit so we can make choices. As long as it stays covert, hidden, and denied, we can't choose. And we keep doing the same things and running into the same stumbling blocks. And if you look at the problems in your own life, If you look at the problems, whether it's with food or intimacy or sex or depression or rage, whatever it is, and you could do a genealogy of that problem, you'll find that problem recurring over and over again back several generations. It'll be there. It's a guarantee. In fact, the biblical quote is, the sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children 3 to 4 generations. I don't know why mothers get off on that quote, but, you know. But see, it's there. And I think that the only way we can offer recovery to our children is to offer recovery to ourselves. But we can't offer recovery to ourselves until we look at the roles that we've played, the roles that we've had. And we've got to look at victim roles. If we've been a victim in our family growing up, guess what? We're still complaining and acting like and feeling like and being a victim in our lives now. If we identified and bonded with the aggressors in our life that hurt us, then we might be hurting other people with our own aggression, with our own feelings, and we might be in the offender role. And if we don't even get it, stay in the victim or offender role, we might be married to someone who is, and we're in the collusive role. Those are 3 other roles that are present in the dysfunctional family. And the collusive role is the one who enables the dysfunction, the violence, the abuse to go on. You know, and they enable it sometimes actively and sometimes passively, but always collusively. Active collusion is where you notice it and you're glad it's going on and you help it happen and you don't do anything about it. Passive collusion is where you put on the blinders and you don't notice it, or you don't know what to do about it after you've noticed it. Or you've had such horrible abuse in your own family that you have this altered baseline tolerance level for what is abusive. You know, if you live in a family where there's all kinds of physical violence and then you marry someone who just occasionally slaps around the kids, that doesn't look abusive at all, does it? If you live in a family where everybody is always being put down and over-criticized and over-controlled, you know, and you live with someone who's over-controlling and putting everybody down and passive-aggressive, it feels pretty normal. You don't notice it because of what we lived with. And we can't change it until we deal with what we've lived with, until we deal with our roles. And codependency and addiction are also roles. We learn how to be addicts. We learn how to medicate our pain. We learn how to deny our feelings. We learn how to change or distract ourselves from our feelings. So we become addicted. We become addicted to chemicals. We become addicted to food. We become addicted to our relationships. We become addicted to worry, obsessiveness. We become addicted to our fears, to our rage, to TV, to vacuuming, to anything that distracts us or changes how we feel, including sex. In fact, the best addictions are those things that make us, that are euphoric, you know, that are quick and readily available, like cocaine, banana cream pie, and sex. Now, all in the same night is a disaster, but, you know. But see, there's a lot of addictions that we don't look at. You know, the addiction to just worrying about what everybody's doing and if everybody's okay. You know, the addiction to our anger, the addiction to our fears. You know, the addiction to vacuuming, the addiction to cleanliness and order and compulsiveness and ritual, and the addiction to things, that things are going to make us happy. You know, and codependency really does become another addiction. It becomes another pathological relationship with something that alters how we feel. As long as we're focusing on what everybody else is doing, as long as we're caretaking and worrying about how they're doing, as long as we're looking at what they're feeling instead of what we're feeling, we don't have to feel. And that is the purpose of addiction, isn't it? So we don't have to feel. And what is it that we don't want to feel about? We don't want to feel about what happened to us in our lives. We don't want to feel about our own emptiness, our own pain, our own hurts. We don't want that child to have to come out and hurt. And so we keep addicting, and we keep hiding that child. We keep hiding those feelings. And that's about childhood. It's about when we were kids, we got hurt. There was someone that was emotionally unavailable to us. There was someone that was drunk. There was someone that was working too much. There was someone that was twisting our ideas and emotionally or mentally or physically abusing us in some ways. Inappropriate touching, you know, that we didn't identify as sexual or sexual abuse, but it was there. There's some things that happened to us that we haven't debriefed, we haven't made real, and we haven't chosen about. And so the choice is, there is no choice. What we do is we pass it on. We pass it on to our own kids instead of back to where it came from. Now, I know we want to see our parents in the best possible light. For many years, I always saw my dad as an alcoholic who really didn't have choice about his disease, but that was the only problem he had, was he had this disease. And then when my dad went through treatment 5 times and still didn't get it, and was still abusive and still rageful when he got out, I realized it wasn't about his alcoholism. It was about what happened to him in his childhood that he passed on to us. It was about that his parents were emotionally unavailable and shaming and dysfunctional and addictive, and he passed it on to us, and I passed it on to my kids. And we keep passing it on. And every role that we have leaves a residual effect on our life long after we've left the role. As a mascot, I still tend to minimize and joke about my feelings when I have them. As a lost child, I still have a hard time feeling like I really belong somewhere, really letting myself immerse in a place, in a family, in a group, in a setting. And as a hero, I'm still trying to do good stuff to make a sick family look better, or still trying to let good feelings in about what I'm doing and not having a lot of success sometimes. You know, and as a caretaker, I'm still trying to take care of other people's needs before my own. And as a codependent, I'm still reacting to more to what's going on outside of me than to what's going on inside of me, and still neglecting myself. And as a victim, I was in a victim role in my family. I still feel helpless about violence when I witness it. I still feel like I can't make a change in my own life. And you know what I believe? I believe that everybody in this family is sick. Would you agree with me? Good. Then let's go to our school districts and say, you know that kid that's getting straight A's and is a captain of everything? That's a sick kid. You know that kid that runs a student peer counseling center and adopts everything that lives, moves, and breathes, and you know, and the veterinarian says that's a sick kid. You know, and you know that kid that's a stand-up comic and runs all the student pep fest, most popular kid in the community. That's a sick kid. And you know the kid that's going to India to save India. What are they going to tell you? That you're a sick kid. You know, are these kids sick? Well, it doesn't look like it. You see, if it works, don't fix it, right? But it's going to break down eventually, isn't it? That's what the whole adult children movement is about. We keep breaking down. Why do we break down? The same reason the Vietnam vets that came back are breaking down. Post-traumatic stress disorder. They live with violence and meaninglessness for 10 months. And they came back and they're cracking up and feeling suicidal and hallucinating and are depressed and they're violent. And they're into drugs and addiction. Over half of them are suffering from PTSD. You know, and it includes things like memory flooding and memory loss and psychic numbing and hyperactivity, unable to be active at all, and the loss in the belief in the meaningfulness of life, and the loss of the belief in the ability to control and have an impact on one's own destiny, and a loss of a sense of spirituality. There is some direction and guidance that we can trust. That's lost. You know, and if it gets lost in Vietnam, and if it gets lost in catastrophes and disasters and kidnappings. You know, in fact, Chowchilla bus kidnapping, 8 days, kids were held captive in a bus. And every one of them kids, every one of those kids, 5 years later, had symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Every one of them had a loss in the ability to believe that there was something meaningful in life that was going to, and that they could impact their own destiny. Now, if 8 days in a bus can do it, can 15 to 20 years in an abusive, neglectful, or violent system do it? Living with unpredictability? Of course, lots of us have PTSD. And we don't know what's wrong with us, and we get misdiagnosed. But finally we're discovering that when we debrief and talk about it with other people that have this PTSD, or other adult children of dysfunctional families, that we're starting to get better. And we can debrief our codependency and our horror stories of codependency and how we don't take care of ourselves with other codependents, we're starting to get better. It's not a replacement for therapy, but sometimes it's a path to therapy. Now, the thing is, see, that you can erase alcohol from the system, and you could put anything in there, couldn't you? You see, it could be dad's depression, could be mom's PMS exacerbated by an eating disorder, it could be a physical illness, it could be a mental illness, it could be a marriage dysfunction. All it takes is a problem. It could be workaholism, it could be anything. All it takes is a problem and denial about the problem, and what you get is everybody whirling about the problem. It's not the problem that sets up the system, it's the denial. And everybody gets in the dysfunctional roles, and everybody gets careful, and everybody gets reactive, and everybody begins acting out. And that's the beginning. But you see, in the sick families, we try to help the family by making it look better, so we don't get help. Like adult children, more adult children are like therapists than anybody else, actually. You know, adult children are always trying to present their best possible side. Therapists do that too. See, and we're always trying to look good and make things work. But then we don't get the help that we need. And in my family, while we were growing up, my brother would have been the only one to qualify for any help because he was getting in trouble. And if he would have been using drugs now, then he would have been the one to get the help. What about the other kids? We're not even starting programs for them. We're not starting programs for the kids that are being captain of their sports teams. They're the ones that need help as much as anybody else. They're as self-destructive. And you think about it. Which kid here is most likely to commit suicide? There's a major problem now with adolescents, isn't it? And children. Which one? Which one's set up? The hero. What about the one that's bonded with mom who feels suicidal and starts feeling mom's suicidality? Okay, what about the one who's always a clown that can't ever share any pain? What about the one that's trying to mediate and fix everything or save everybody else? See, there's that emptiness of self in each of these kids, the loss of self. Suicide is just the natural expression of the loss of self. And it's not a natural expression, but it's logical. But I think, first of all, it takes learning suicidality. And so when we feel suicidal, what kind of things do we say to our kids? Oh, it's kind of hopeless. Oh, you just can't, nothing ever changes. Oh, it doesn't work out. Things just don't work out. I don't know. I'm really stuck in my life. Oh, I don't know what to do. Oh, I wished I were dead. You know, and guess what happens? Our kids learn that style. They learn that thinking. They believe it. We don't act it out because we know eventually it'll pass. Kids don't know that things will pass. And when we were kids, we didn't know that things would pass. We didn't know that things would change. And I think one of our functions as parents is to encourage and teach kids that things do change, to keep at least some hope, some optimism about our own lives, and that we pass that on too. I think the biggest gift we can give our kids is not to get rid of all the dysfunction in our life. Maybe it's to get rid of a lot of the denial in our life. I think the biggest gift that we can give our kids is to make a choice for recovery. A lot of us are addicts, right? Anybody here not an addict? I bet I could take 2 hours and convince you that everybody here is an addict. You know, and give me another 15 minutes, I could convince, I bet if there's 100 people in this room, there's more than that actually, that 75 of you have been physically abused. At least 75% of all Americans have been physically abused. And I'll bet 20 to 30% have experienced sexual abuse. In fact, 1 out of 3 women in our society are sexual abuse victims. Psychology Today in February issue. 1 out of 4 before the age of 13. See, we've been hurt, we've been injured, and we weren't allowed to have our feelings about that, so we became addicted. You know, in fact, Stanton Peele calls addiction mankind's great unifying experience. You know, you want to see an addict, look in a mirror. That's all there is to it. So we're addicts. You know, and a lot of us haven't chosen. Well, we didn't choose. People don't choose addictions. What addiction is the loss of choice. It's choicelessness. We have repetitive patterns of self-destructive behavior that we continue and we continue and we continue. You don't choose addictions, but you can choose recovery. And my belief is that recovery is not a destination. That recovery is not some place that you get to. Recovery is the journey. And once you're on the journey, you're in recovery. That's the destination. The other thing is that, yes, you know, a lot of us sit here and say, oh, yeah, I was hurt, you know, and I might be a little addicted here, a little obsessive there or whatever. And, yeah, I probably hurt my kids, you know, but, you know, it's too late. I can't do anything about that. A couple of things about how we've hurt our kids. The first is that how we've hurt our kids is another way that we've been hurt growing up. We also have to pass that back. You see, I was punishing myself and beating myself for hurting my kids. And finally, someone came up and said, Terry, how you hurt your kids is just another example of how you got hurt in your family growing up. And I realized that I'd been trying to write checks out of an empty account. I had never gotten what I was trying to give, and I couldn't ever start to give it until I got it. And I had to become like that child, and I had to start getting my nurturing and my dependency needs met so I could start meeting my kids' dependency needs. The other part that I want to emphasize is that we don't choose our addictions, but we can choose recovery. Recovery is a choice. See, all therapy can do is help make your choices explicit. They can't choose for you. And we can make choices to recover. And if we do recover, dysfunction is intergenerational, but recovery is also intergenerational. We pass on our recovery to all of those people around us and to those people that follow us, to future generations. Our recovery impacts those future generations just like my father's alcoholism impacts those future generations. And that's the message of hope, that the recovery is intergenerational too. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to be in perfect recovery according to our standards. It means that we have given some opportunities, some choices, but we can't make choices for other people. Sometimes we just give them the opportunity by our own model behavior, and they make the choice. Okay, I think I'm going to talk about the core of our being for just a minute. I think there's 2 cores to our being that are sort of intertwined in our being, and that is our sexuality and our spirituality. Our spirituality, I think my spirituality is who I am and the process of becoming myself. In other words, my becoming the person that I was meant to be by my Creator. And my relationship with all of creation and the creative process is my spirituality. Okay? My sexuality is who I am as a man, and my relationship with myself as a man, and my immersion in the whole pool of creation, my physical, sensual immersion, and how I experience life is my sexuality. And so you kind of see that the two of them are very allied. In fact, I've noticed in my practice that a lot of people with sexual problems presenting are really experiencing spiritual crises. In fact, that's addiction is always a spiritual bankruptcy. I've also noticed that a lot of people with spiritual problems are having sexual problems, and they kind of present as because the core of our identity is both our spirituality and our sexuality. Any abuse, any neglect, any violence is spiritual and sexual violence. It always affects our relationship with creation, our ability to become the person we were meant to be, and our relationship with ourselves as men and women. And all shame is sexual shame. It always gets tied into who we are as men and women and how we feel about ourselves as men and women. How specific do you have to understand your parents' behavior to change? And I'd say as specifically as you need to change. Now, that's a circle answer, isn't it? But you see, if you do some work and you've sort of got an idea, like you start out and you say, well, my dad just was a workaholic. Oh, really? Well, yeah, he used to come home 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning all the time from work. And I said, well, where did he work? He worked in a bank. Okay, now we might start getting suspicious that there's something else going on here, okay? All right, so now we might say, well, he was probably either out messing around with women, or he was drinking, or he was gambling. But he was acting out. He wasn't just working. Okay, so you make that real, and then you go on, but you're still real compulsive and confused, and things don't fit. Go back and try and get a little more specific. Oh, you mean Dad was having an affair that whole time? Oh, you mean I'm in this relationship with this man who I think is acting out with other women, at least even if he doesn't have an affair, he's always seductive, and it drives me out of my mind, and I feel depressed and jealous and suicidal. Oh, you mean that might be about my dad? The reenactment of the feelings, the staying stuck. See, and so you can start to detach from it and make choices then once you make it real about where it came from. Okay, that's just an example of how specific sometimes you need to get. And usually all the data is there. It's just that we've learned not to notice it. But even if it's not there, our feelings are there. Our feelings never lie. Our bodies remember, our feelings remember, and you can follow the feelings and back to the reality, and sometimes even the images of what actually happened or what was going on around us. Sometimes it's just, what did your parents fight about? What were the mythologies about who these people were? How did they behave around other people? We have to get more objective and kind of look at a little bit of therapy is like detective work. But I think that there's a limit to how much detective work we have to do and how much therapy. I believe in therapy. I believe getting in and getting out as fast as you can with the willingness to go back in if you need to. And recovery is within us. Therapists just serve as guides to that recovery. It's within us. And I think the process of recovery is our own process. It's an internal process. And I think we have to be careful of our guides, too. We have to watch that. One more thing I want to say, and I want to emphasize this. Yeah, we've got to get mad. We've got to see what happened, but we also have to forgive, and we have to self-forgive. And I think all of family systems therapy, all the work that I do, the workshop that Bedford and Charlie and I just put on, it's really a forgiveness process that we just put on. And forgiveness is part of spiritual healing as well. And I believe that forgiveness potentiates at least the possibility of relationships intergenerationally. I think that we can have relationships if we work a forgiveness process. But I think it eliminates any possibility if we don't. And forgiveness is a process, and I'm going to very quickly take you through the stages of forgiveness. Recognize the wrongs done. Denial precludes the possibility of forgiveness. Forgetting is not forgiving. You've got to recognize that you got hurt. Recognize that you had feelings about the wrong, because our denial of our feelings sets us up to pass those feelings on, to be offenders, to continue to be victims, and to be addicts. Got to recognize that they're about feelings, that we still have feelings now about stuff, losses, things that hurt us a long time ago. Next thing is to learn to share the feelings with others. Embrace the feelings first. Feel them. Become real. Our feelings are us, and when we deny our feelings, we're not us. The next thing is we got to learn to share our feelings with others. Sometimes with the people that hurt us, but not always. But always with someone. And that's where we learn to love others. Because love is the act of sharing your reality. Love isn't something you fall into. You fall into a lot of money, you fall into a vat of chocolate, but you don't fall in love. Love is what you do. And the next stage after we learn to share our feelings with others, we make a decision about the relationship with the people that hurt us. Now, sometimes we feel guilty and bad about that decision, but it's an important decision that we have to make. But you see, it's also a process, and sometimes to decide not to decide is a process. And so, over time, we have to know what relationship we have with those people that hurt us. If we've dealt with the hurt and the feelings, we can have relationship. Sometimes we need separation. Sometimes that separation may be permanent because the abuse was so and is so terrible. Usually, though, we just need separation so we can find ourselves. See, and once we find ourselves, we can have relationship without getting enmeshed. We lose ourselves when we don't have ourselves. Every time you don't have yourself and your own identity and your own feelings and your own boundaries, when you get in a relationship, you get enmeshed and you lose that sense of self even more. And you don't know where you stop and they begin or which finger belongs to which hand. And so we need that separation so that we can have detachment, so we can be in a relationship where we're close but not losing self. And that's true with our parents and our spouses and our kids and our friends and our communities. It's true with everybody. You have to have yourself so you don't get lost in enmeshment. The next stage is that you get a sense of acceptance and serenity about both the wrong done and the relationship with the wrongdoer. See, and that doesn't mean we don't have feelings. I will always be angry about being a witness to violence because a witness to violence is a victim of violence. And I watched my mom get beat up, and I'll always be angry about that. I never not want to be angry about that. I'll always be hurt by what I didn't get as a child because I'll never be able to get it as a child. But those feelings don't have to control my life. And as long as I embrace those feelings and allow them to be there, they won't. See, and they're manageable. And I can choose to share them when it's appropriate. And so I have a sense of boundary about my feelings, but I have my feelings. But I also have some sense that I can have a relationship with my parents, and it feels okay. And it feels okay who they are. And it feels okay if they don't change. I can go down there and I can get the parenting that they have to offer. My parents live in Las Vegas, the acting out capital of the world. But I choose the relationship. It's based on my needs and not theirs. See, and that's the beginning of health for me. And the guilt that we feel when we change this stuff is a function of the family dysfunction. A healthy family wants its members to be doing what and being where they are the happiest and healthiest. A dysfunctional family has all these controls about where you are and when you call and what you do and where you spend Christmas, see, and it doesn't work. See, and so I see this as a forgiveness process. It provides the possibility of healing intergenerationally, but it provides the guarantee of healing ourselves. And that's what forgiveness is. It's really a spiritual healing of self and not a fix for a relationship. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Kellogg on Codependency. For a copy of this tape, send $39.95 to Family Recovery Incorporated, 4221 Purdue, Dallas, Texas, 75225.
And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold.